think that's gonna work. Okay. This is Petra here. I am very excited to be harvesting these plant medicines that I grew in the garden this summer. I've got 4 different herbs here that I'm gonna be processing by hand, taking this plant material that has been drying and break it down and put it in the jars for storage. So, welcome. Happy Libra season, happy harvest season. I am going to just go about this. Might not be a lot of talking, or maybe I will talk. I'm just gonna kind of go with the flow. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of opinions and knowledge and facts, and at the moment I'm just spending this time with these plants. And so this really invites me to come into the moment and be present with what's right in front of me. And the blue jay that's outside has a message. This is the time of day when they come through the garden as the sun is going down in the late afternoon. They always show up at this time. So yeah, I'm just gonna let myself be present. Like, I have a lot of thoughts about Libra season, and I have all these things I could say about the eclipse that's coming up tomorrow, and this Aries Libra axis of war and peace, of relationships and the self, and destruction and harmony. Like, there's so many things I could dive into in terms of Libra season and this moment in particular, in this eclipse cycle. Lots of things I could say, but I'm gonna take this moment in this video and this session with this plant medicine to just be really present with what I'm doing, and yeah, see what comes up through that. So this first plant that I'm working with here is lemon verbena, and it smells amazing. I wish I could, somehow communicate scent through the internet, because this smell, I just learned recently that this smell actually mimics these pheromones of a queen bee, and the scent of lemon verbena. And it just like to attract pollinators, right? And it's such a sweet fragrance. Lemon balm and lemons themselves, and like the citrus smelling plants have that kind of more sharp or a more clear smell. This lemon verbena has this very warm vanilla kind of undertone to it. It feels more sweeter. And so I learned recently that it's mimicking the bees' pheromones, and it just made sense to me because it smells like a queen would smell. Definitely would love to have like a lemon verbena perfume. I've, used the scent of it a lot just to kind of lighten my mood and lift my mood and really bring in that very Venusian, Venus principle of, delight, right? Taking delight in the senses. And one of the best ways to become present is to pay attention to the senses. And that is something that Libra deeply understands as a sign, because this is the time of year when I'm sitting here and I'm kind of taking in all of the satisfaction of all my hard work over the summer. These plants, I grew them in my garden, and these are the leaves that started to show up in Aries season, and now full circle. Not full circle, half circle, right? This is the setting of the sun when the sun gets lower, and Aries is when the sun rises in the sky and we get more sunlight. So it's a full growing season, which is half the year. And it's the time when you get to literally enjoy everything that you did over the past 6 months if you're working with the seasons. It's incredibly satisfying, right? There's a sense of like, I get to step back and really appreciate the sensual satisfaction of my own investments and all of the exchanges and relationships that I've built over the summer, because that's what a garden is. It's a series of relationships between the gardener and the plants. And this is the fruit of that labor, product of those relationships, the product of all those days giving water to this plant, giving fertilizing the soil. And now there's this kind of offering and exchange coming back to me. I get to enjoy this abundance. The plant, that's one thing that plants really have taught me. And one of the main principles of Libra season, of cardinal air, of the western direction of where the sun sets, right? This principle of death. And plants die every year. They die back. This lemon verbena plant is not missing these leaves. It was going to die anyways, right? It was going to release these leaves and let them fall to the ground. And me harvesting them is not taking anything away from that plant, because I'm harvesting at the time when that plant would be releasing and letting these leaves die. So it's this way of viewing death when you look at through the lens of plants, because the lemon verbena plant is not dead, right? It just released all of these leaves. All of the leaves that it produced this year are dead. And so it releases those, but it's still alive, but it doesn't appear to be alive from the surface, right? All of the roots are living. Lemon verbena have a particular way of working with the seasons. They're, perennials, which mean they continue to live year after year. Whereas annuals, they just live for one season, and they do die. Their roots, dry up and everything, but they have a way of seeding themselves, right? Libra season and the harvest season is when they produce all their seeds. But perennial plants like lemon verbena here, it stays alive. The roots of the plant stay alive, and it just loses its leaves, right? It's deciduous. And yeah, it's not a view of death that is kind of sees it as the end. It's part of a cycle, right? Of birth, life, death, afterlife, birth, life, death, afterlife. And it's this every plant has its sort of unique strategy for working with that cycle. Is it gonna, in the death cycle, does it completely die back and release seeds to be, germinated over the winter and then come up again in the spring? That's what annuals do. Or is it like this plant where it just releases its leaves and then hibernates and then shoots up new leaves in the spring? And then there's also evergreen plants, which are really interesting. I have a redwood tree that I, observe and work with. And the way that they work with, they never completely lose their leaves, but they, let's see, this is not going to fit in here, huh? They never lose their leaves, evergreens, but what happens is they do lose their leaves. They just grow their new leaves at the same time. And that is happening right now with this redwood tree that I observe closely, and how she works with the cycles. And the redwood trees, they do this right now in Libra season, where they actually sprout, or the autumn time in general, it's the whole season where this happens, where they start to sprout new leaves at the same time that they release their old leaves. And this is the time of year when there's a lot of wind that comes up. And so the wind kind of shakes loose and shakes off all the old dying leaves. And you can see this in the redwoods because there's a really clear color difference. The new leaves are very bright green, and the ones that are staying are that deep kind of classic evergreen pine type of color. And then the leaves that die are really brown, and they turn completely brown. So it turns into 3 different colors, and the brown ones get, the wind comes through and kind of shakes loose all the brown leaves. And so I'd say it's about 30%, a third of the leaves get shaken off. It's quite a lot. Like every year it's a good portion of the tree gets released, but it's happening simultaneously to the new growth coming in. So that's a totally different strategy. I think I need to start a new jar for this. This I had already harvested, and I'm not breaking it down all the way on these ones. If I wanted to fit it all in one jar, that's what I would do. Break down the leaves into much smaller pieces. But I'm not doing that for the lemon verbena because the scent is in the oils, the volatile oils within the plant. And when you crush it, it releases those oils. So I'm keeping as much oil content in the plant as possible by leaving it whole. I might be able to put this in. Might work. I think it's just gonna fit. Yeah, so it keeps it smelling really strong. And then if I put it in a tea or make something with it, I can crush it at that time and it will be much stronger of a scent. Okay, I think this is... Oh my god, it smells so good. Yeah, cool. Okay, just going to clean this out. All right. Next up, what do we have? I'm going to do Tulsi next. Another incredibly intoxicating scent. Holy basil is, talk about a queenly smell. It's incredibly sweet and fragrant and floral, and also kind of spicy and warm. Definitely a very Venusian plant. Let's see, I think I was able to pick this before it seeded, which is always the thing. Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, that's good. These go to seed, and then there's like so many seeds coming out. But I think I picked this in time. Good, yes I did. Great. It's kind of hard to tell with it too. Oh my God, it smells so good. I made an oil with this, and for the first time this summer, and I'm curious how it comes out. I've never done a holy basil oil. I'm trying to see if I can extract the smell. We shall see. It's time to strain those oils too. I think there's more, might be seeds in here. This is where the seed pods, where the seeds develop in these pods. And I think this is such a beautiful signature. They look like staffs. Let's see if we can see it. Yeah. It looks like a staff that has like almost bells or something on it. It looks like a wise woman's staff, a wise man's staff to me. And this plant, this is very much a Libra plant too, because it's Venus, but it's also Saturn. And Saturn is exalted in Libra. Saturn is all about consequences, and so it likes to be that energy of consequences and the material impact of something, right? We see that in Libra season, right? This is when we judge how well we did over the year, when we get to see the material results for all the actions that we took since Aries season. It's like, Aries initiates that movement. It's when we start all of the planting process. And Cancer season is when we are really, in the most important part of tending to the plants that are growing. That's when, we're busy nurturing and watering everything, right? That's when we have to do the most watering because the sun is the hottest and there's the most sun at that point, right? So it's drawing, all the plants are drawing in that nutrient, so they're receiving through the water and the light. And then Leo is really that flowering season when things really start to, bear their fruit, bear their flowers, and Virgo, there's this progression between these phases, right? These different phases where we're kind of, when we go through Aries into Cancer, Aries being the springtime, into Cancer being the summertime, and then we hit fall with Libra. It's like, that's when you get to sit back and judge everything that happened over the summer. And, people talk shit about Saturn being the judge, or Saturn being, well, I won't say talk shit, but, holding people accountable, right? Saturn is, can sometimes be seen as like limitations and blocks, but it's also that kind of karma, right? Like you get, when you put in and you have integrity and you do the work, you are, you move forward, right? You pass these initiations. Libra is kind of the season when that gets checked, right? When you're working with plants, that is the time when it's kind of like, okay, which plant is making the cut, right? Who did well and who did not, right? There's this kind of judging, and that's the Justice card in tarot, right? Is Libra. That kind of weighing the scales. Quite literally, that's what we're doing as farmers or gardeners. You are weighing the scales to see how well things performed. So we see this, and I think that's a side of Saturn. We see this kind of sensual pleasure in Libra, and I think that's a side of Saturn that is not really talked about. The sensuality, like we talk about Capricorn as being very like practical, and Capricorn being that winter, the hibernation phase, which is where Saturn is at home. But Saturn is exalted here in this season, where we're actually like smelling and tasting and tactile, like touching every plant that passes through the growing process, and then it gets preserved, right? And it gets put in storage so that it can be useful later, during the winter, in next season, right? These will last for about 6 months until they start to lose their potency. So this will be carrying me through these actions that I'm taking now in Libra season, of weighing things out and seeing which ones do I want to save, what makes the cut, what doesn't. And it's a quality check, right? Libra's all about that quality. And that's when I get to the middle of the winter in Capricorn season, in Saturn season, that's when this comes in handy. That's when it really matters what I was harvesting, right? That's in the middle of winter when nothing is growing. I'm really gonna depend on what I've preserved now in this season. So that's that relationship between Libra and Capricorn, and how Saturn plays into that, and why it's exalted here at this time of year. Because it's kind of like, I almost see it as like, Saturn's home in that winter point of the year, but it shows up now, and it sets itself up, and it comes through and checks. It does that quality check with the winter in mind. So that is my phone. Okay. I can call them back. So, yeah, Tulsi is very much a Saturn and Venus plant. It has that sturdiness and integrity, and it also has that sensual, beautiful like sensually pleasing, like, I mean, like the senses, right? Yeah. Okay, that's Tulsi. And okay, next I have two types of skull cap. Speaking of Saturn, this is also a Saturn planet. I have two types of skull cap. And first, let's just clean this out. All right, so we have two types. I'll do this one first. I think this one did go to seed, so we will see. These also have little seed packets in a similar pattern, and I do think this is a Saturn signature. I don't know if you can see this, how people do it like that. Yeah, so you can see it has that similar seed pod kind of stacked on top of each other as the Tulsi, and it's has a similar inner integrity that it does for the body. This plant works on, yeah, this is definitely seeds. Yep. Oh well, we'll just sort it. Skull cap establishes integrity within the mind and the nervous system. It repairs the nervous system. It helps coat the nerves in, the protective fluids that keep us from having our nerves literally burnt by the electricity of, the impulses that run through your nervous system. And so this plant Tulsi also works on the nervous system, and it also does that, strengthens, it creates this internal strength, internal ability to kind of maintain yourself, maintain your center, even as the world is, rocking you from side to side. That's kind of the hallmark or the indicator of a healthy nervous system, is not that you're not affected by the world around you, right? It's not that you don't respond with fear if there's something dangerous coming towards you, right? It's not a lack of response, but it's the ability to reestablish and come back to a state of equilibrium within yourself, right? So if you have a healthy nervous system that has that flexibility, you're able to kind of jump into that fight or flight mode when you need to, because we have those responses for a reason. They're very useful, right? We need to feel fear. We need to feel anger. We need to feel all of these emotions that, the fight or flight responses, these are our body's ways of taking action, right? And so I think there's this mistaken, ideology of not being affected by the world around us, right? That we shouldn't, don't show fear, or whatever, right? The kind of stoic way of approaching things. But that's not really a healthy functioning nervous system either. And the polar opposite would be just completely being sent into a state where you can't come out of fear, or you can't come out of anger, or you can't come out of particular responses. The nervous system is about being able to shift between these different states as is needed for your best interest in your human body, right? So being able to have that equilibrium, that flexibility of going from, one extreme of fight or flight to the other extreme of rest and being calm and being peaceful. And so there's this inner equilibrium that's established when we're able to be as flexible as possible with our nervous system. And that's what this plant particularly helps with. That's also what Tulsi helps with. And so there's this strength through flexibility, right? That's established. And I think that really speaks to that same relationship between Saturn and Libra, or Saturn and Venus, right? That there's a strength, that strength of Saturn and that integrity of Saturn comes from being able to shift and be flexible and be able to go from one extreme to the other. And do that in a way that's appropriate, right? In a way that's beneficial. It's a very important relationship. That relationship between Libra and Saturn, Libra and Capricorn, Venus and Saturn. It's a square. The astrological angle between the two is a square, right? A 90-degree angle. That's the beginning of fall and the beginning of winter, right? Cardinal air and cardinal earth. And it is the inner world. This is the time from autumn through winter, right? Those two seasons, that makes up the half of the year that is the darker half of the year, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere, right? We go from the fall equinox, which is Libra, right? That balancing of the scales, that duality, that flexibility, the cardinal air element that's able to go in between, exchange. Literally, scales illustrates that principle of duality, right? And of being able to find the balance point, the equilibrium point between two extremes. That we start there with the equinox, the autumn equinox, and we go through the darker part of the year. And here in the garden, it's really obvious the difference, right? Because the plants pretty much stop growing at this point of the year. There's very little new development in terms of leaves and flowers, and there's lots of development that's happening underground. And so if you live in a warmer place like I do, you can actually plant seeds at this time, or plant cuttings, root cuttings, because this is a good time for them to be working on their root system. And so there's all this activity happening under the ground. And so it's also the time when, as the gardener, my focus shifts to being more inside physically. I'm doing this more than I'm working in the garden. My attention is not really needed out there as much as it's needed here, doing stuff like this. And so it's a time where both myself and the plants are resting, but you can also see that rest, what it really is it's the activity that's happening underneath the surface that can't be seen from outside. So that half of the year, right, the autumn into the the winter. This is really the time of death and afterlife. It's kind of when the part of the life cycle, right, where things are regenerated. And it's interesting. That I'm just thinking about these plants being these kind of plants that deal with that inner world, the mind, the moods, the things that are happening within us that are dictating our actions and what we do, right? Every conscious thought that we have, it's kind of arising from our subconscious beliefs or perspectives. Every, action that we take, everything that we create is an expression of what's inside us. And these plants they tend to that space within the person if we're, when we're dealing with medicine. These Saturn and Venus plants. I didn't even mean for these to be Saturn and Venus. Did not even, there just happened to be the ones. I mean, that is a little bit interesting, because I was going to say, well, it has, I have harvested a bunch of other plants that are associated with other planets, but that actually did happen earlier in the season. Like calendula is really harvested all summer long. It starts, as early as like Gemini season. If you get enough sun, even in Aries season, you start to get flowers that you can pick. So there's not, there hasn't been that many calendula at this point in the year. It needs more sun. So these plants took longer. I'm just noticing that now as I'm talking about it. That's so interesting. What I'm noticing is that these plants I'm harvesting them later in the season, and this one is lemon verbena is Venus. I would say, and possibly Mercury. This is Venus and Saturn, and then this is Saturn. I would say Skullcap is Saturn and the Moon. This is Saturn and the Moon for sure. So there's this, which makes sense. There is a pattern here that Saturn plants sort of wait, or they take their time to develop over the full growing season, and they're harvested later in the season. Makes total sense. That is a signature of Saturn. That right there is called the doctrine of signatures in herbalism, which is the idea that the signature, the energetic signature of a plant is visible in the way that it's structured and also the way that it grows. So it would make sense that Saturn, which is a plant that deals with time, right, and full maturity of cycles, Makes sense that those plants would take all season to be ready. All right, we've got one more. Got the other kind of skullcap, which is a broader leaf. If I put these in the compost, there's going to be a million skullcap seedlings coming out of the dirt. Yeah, so you can see this one has bigger leaves, but it has the same signature of this tall stalk with the seed pods that looks like a staff. And they're both types of skullcap are great for medicine. It's just a slightly different size leaf. Yeah, those have seeds. Yeah, and try to catch these before they go to seed, because I think in general that's a better time to harvest because the plant hasn't started, making seeds yet. And, all the energy is just going to the leaves. But these ones are hard to catch them before they're very quickly go to seed. And yeah, I had harvested some before and then did another batch. And these ones have gone to seed. These don't really have a smell. Yeah, they have just kind of a general greenery smell. But I am keeping them whole instead of breaking down the leaves, just to keep as much medicinal content in the plant matter as possible. Skullcap is a very delicate leaf. It's very, it breaks down very easily. It's very soft. And so I just kind of intuitively feel like I want to keep the leaves as intact as possible while I store them until I'm ready to use them, and then I'll break them down further. But here you can see the pretty little blue flowers. So delicate. Yeah, it's a very delicate, and that's the thing, right? About these, again, that flexibility and kind of fine sensitivity actually being the source of strength, right? And being the source of integrity. And that's what I think the skullcap really gets into with the moon qualities, because it deals with water and it deals with the fluids around our nervous system that coats the nervous system. And so the more water, the more fluids you have coating your nerves, the faster and more accurate the electrical impulses are. You're actually you become more conductive, right? Or you can conduct more electricity if you have this kind of protective buffer, right? This layer of fluid around coating the cells. They can channel a high amount of electricity, which is what our nerves do, right? That's what a nervous system is, channeling electrical impulses from our brain, from our skin, from our different senses, right? It's passing these this information in the form of electric charge. And so when we say our nerves are fried, they're literally fried because that electricity is hot. And so this plant is cooling, and it restores the fluids around those cells that could carry the electricity. And that's the moon. That's the principle of the moon. This protective layer, this fluid that creates protection. And so we see this beautiful relationship between Saturn and the moon, which is an opposition, not a square, right? The moon is Cancer season, which is cardinal water. So this plant really is that axis between cardinal earth, or that Capricorn point of the winter solstice, and the summer solstice point, the opposite point of cardinal water. Cancer season, that's when that's where the moon is at home, and Capricorn is where Saturn is at home. And so there's this axis of sensitivity, the fluid that allows us to be sensitive is what creates that equilibrium, that state of integrity internally. And I think we really do often get caught up thinking that it's the opposite, right? That being hard and cold and cut off from feeling, of perceiving, of receiving information, of being, of having our nervous system activated, right? We often perceive that as a state of weakness, or a state of vulnerability, or a state of, oh, you're sensitive. I mean, think about the word sensitive. We think that it just means like, oh, you cry easily, or you're, affected greatly or emotionally by things. When it actually means being able to sense things, right? If you have a highly sensitive instrument, that means that it's very perceptive. It's receiving a lot of information. That's what a healthy nervous system is doing, right? It's able to receive and process a lot of that electrical information. And so it needs this watery fluid that allows us to channel that electricity. And then it helps us establish that internal strength. And it's actually through being sensitive that we're able to establish that internal strength. This center point of kind of having integrity, right? It's not being not affected by the world. It's being affected in the right ways, right? And if something is wrong, you need to recognize that, right? And so that you can respond to that. If something, and we also need to be able to recognize when things are for us, when things are beneficial for us, are going our way, or are working, towards our benefit. It's like we need to be able to recognize what is in front of us. And so this is that beautiful balance between that opposition. Whereas, this is more, it's so interesting how I feel like plants have almost have like a big three, like the way humans have our sun, our moon, and our rising. Right, so I would say this skull cap is probably those three. It's probably like a Libra sun with a Capricorn moon and a Cancer rising or something like that. Because it's really embodying these cardinal points. So interesting. I learned a lot today. I didn't think I was going to be talking about that specific relationship between those planetary bodies. But yeah, it's interesting to explore that relationship, those relationships, right, between integrity, sensitivity, the senses, and these phases of the life cycle, and these parts of ourselves and the parts of the plants. They're all correlated. All right, that's it for now. I will see y'all later.